Welcome to the third video segment of this unique team teaching experiment. After explaining the approach used for team teaching a conflict, here Professors Asassian and Kaufman explore the roots of the Palestinian and Jewish national movements, following the established and often conflictive narratives of both sides. It is very difficult to cut a 90-minute class into a 14-minute video, but there's no better way for you to experience the professor's profound understanding of this tragic clash than by being in the classroom yourself. For more information on how you can attend this summer course offered at the University of Maryland, email Professor Kaufman.
I would say there are three main reasons. The first one has to do with the fact of world history, or European history to be more correct. The idea of the nation-state idea that came clear with the French Revolution, not that long earlier. The idea that each nation has a right to have a state of their own, with representatives, republics and so on. That was the idea that only took power 50 or 60 years before the Zionist movement. And it took a little bit longer also to reach where most Jews lived at that time, which was Russia and Poland, especially Poland. Poland was an interesting case because the Poles were not independent till World War I. They were conquered by three states, by the Russian Tsar, by the German Empire, and by Austro-Hungary. There was no Poland. For the entire 19th century, there was no Poland. And there were about 3 million Jews in Poland, just to give you an example. And suddenly there was a strong Polish nationalism next door. I mean, next to, when they open the door, they see nationalism. And everywhere in this part of, the idea was finished with the empires. Every nation should have a state, and that will be it. And the Jews, who were not having a best of their life anyway, they said, why not us? We are a very old nation. And we are very scattered, unfortunately, because we were thrown into exile 2,000 years ago at that time, let's say 1,800 years ago. But we also want to have a nation state. And the idea to have a nation state was very attractive. So they say, let's do it. And they called it Zionism, because in Jerusalem, in the kind of the center of Jerusalem, next to the old city of Jerusalem, there is a mount called Mount Zion. So the idea of Zionism is as simple as the Jewish people in the diaspora, which is also a Greek word that was used for the Jewish dispersion around the world, and now it's used universally. The idea was the diaspora should reunite back in Zion, in Jerusalem.
Return to Zion.
Return to Zion, that's all it is. Now, there were also factions, as my colleague said, but there were ideologic factions in Zionism, from right to left, and you name it, maybe there was no one group that could monopolize the term of Zionism. They all agreed, though, that the idea of coming back to Zion was very relevant for the Jewish people. And there was a time where there was such a bad situation in anti-Semitism in some parts that I said, let's do it now. I said, wow, that was the Turkish Empire at the time. They don't listen to us. How can we do it now? And then a group of Zionists that we call the territorialists, they call themselves territorialists, no matter what territory. And somebody came up with the idea of Uganda. I said, let's have the Jewish state in Uganda. They put it to a vote because, the Zionist movement, when it became institutionalized in 1896, was very democratic. From day one, lucky us, it was very democratic. They put it to a vote, and the territorialists lost. They lost, and the majority say, you cannot be a Zionist and not have the place for the nation state in Zion. Second one has to do with the question of anti-Semitism. Now, many people understand that if the Jews are persecuted, they should have a refuge where to run away. And that was, to a large extent, part of the concept of the Jewish state. Still is a refuge for Jews who need to find a place to live because of the conditions. So most Jews from Russia suffer anti-Semitism, but most Jews from Russia came to the West, not only to the US, but also to Latin America. Very few came to Israel or Palestine. At that time there was no such a name, it was part of the Ottoman Empire, especially 1904, it was a major pogrom. The point that really got the Jews to understand that they have to go there and not to the golden land of opportunities was the sudden realization that even in the most advanced societies there could be or there is anti-Semitism. And that was revealed in a very famous trial in France called the Dreyfus trial. Many of you have heard about it. And the third reason, and then I will finish this part, has to do with religion. It is very difficult for many people to understand whether Jews are a nation or a religion or both. And even myself find it very difficult to agree with many other Jews on the question, what is a Jew? Or what is? I would say the following. I wouldn't be surprised that among many of the Zionists from the left, there were atheist Zionists. So Jewish religion, they believe in God even, did not appeal to them at all. And yet there were Zionists. And then yet there were Jews. Till the 19th century, which is the time we are talking about, Jews in the diaspora were kept Jews by religion. That is very clear, and there is no disagreement on that. People say, and I think it's a nice expression, you know, the Torah is the Bible. And we have two scrolls. When you go to the temple, you open the scrolls, you close the scrolls. Some people say the Jews had in the two scrolls of the Torah their portable state. Those who built this Zionism rebelled against the majority of the religious Jews who say you cannot build a state until the Messiahs come back. Because they were so religious that they look at the text, you know, literally, and they say Messiahs not come back, has to come, sorry. So you have to wait for the Messianic days. A minority among the religious, called the religious Zionists, and there is such a part in Israel, they say no, that's not true. We suffer and so on and so forth. We can wait in Jerusalem, because in Jerusalem we're close to God anyway. And they were Zionists. But the majority, I mean the ultra-Orthodox, even today, you may know some of them, they want to have nothing to do with Israel. They will refuse to speak Hebrew, our national language. They will talk Yiddish, which is a language of the diaspora in East Europe, like German more or less.
Ironically, the origins of Palestinian nationalism that started with Arab nationalism was also formulated around the same time. At the time when the Ottoman Empire was crumbling because of the many wars that they have fought with Prussia, Russia, what have you, and with the disintegration of the central authorities within the Ottoman Empire, it gave a rise basically to the national minorities seeking independence. And the Arabs were considered to be among the most potential minority in the Middle East, where they were under the banners of Islam, being part and parcel of this overstretched, what we call Ottoman Empire. A major, I would say, contribution to the crumbling of the Ottoman Empire is the failure of introducing basic reforms. Although, you know, the Sultan had promised on many occasions that reforms could take place in the provinces, in the Arab provinces, in the Armenian provinces, Greek, Balkans, and what have you, we haven't seen that, you know, being concretized, which made it, you know, very frustrating for the people, for the ethnic and national minorities living under the Ottoman Empire at the time when they lacked, you know, all kinds of progress and development. With the high taxation that they used to pay at that time, it made it impossible for them to accept, you know, the rule of the latest Ottomans. There are many factors that led to the rise of Arab nationalism. Ironically enough, it's not only political Zionism and Arab nationalism came to the fore at the same time, but also there was the inclination of Turkish citizens who became more and more affected by the Western ideologies, by the concept of nation states, that they themselves also started witnessing changes from Ottomanism, feudalism, into something called nation-state Turkish nationalism. So the question of Turkification of the minorities that came at a later stage was the result of pan-Turanism that led to the massacres of Armenians, Greeks, and what have you around World War I. And with Napoleon's invasion of Egypt around 1789, 1798, impacted the Arabs with the modern ideas that came with the technology and the military power. It was an eye-opener for the Arabs to believe that the question of pan-Islamism and the Ottomanism that ruled by the name of Islam is not basically a fair system anymore, because all of them are Muslims, but they were treated as second and third class citizens in terms of priorities, in terms of serving the armies, and what have you. Maybe ironically enough, the minority of the Arabs who were not Muslims, we refer to them as the Arab Christian intellectuals in the Levant area, which is Iraq, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, were the leading Christian intellectuals who adopted these Western ideas for, of course, several reasons which I will discuss. And they put together the idea of Arab nationalism as a substitute to Islamism within the concept of Ottomanism that had basic orientation towards the Turkification of the national and ethnic minorities under the banners of Islam. The other ideology which came to the form, and then they were compatible in terms of convergence of interest, was Islamic reformism. Many Muslims, the traditionalist Muslims, Arabs within the Ottoman Empire, were loyal to the Sultan. Those were the traditionalist Muslims. But the Islamic reformists, those who became more or less aware of the Western value system, they were aware of nationalism and the concept of nation state and the question of education that changed the lives of people during the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution in Europe, were a different category of Muslim intellectuals who wanted to reform not Islam as a religion, but to reform the political structure of Islam, which was totally abused by the Ottomans in subduing basically the other national and ethnic minorities. By the year 1880, there was the beginning of movement based in Damascus and Beirut. These are the two capitals of Syria and Lebanon later, demanding the independence of the Levantine Arabs from the Turks. Of course, after the many attempts requested by reforms failed, they had no choice except to join the 1916 revolt that was declared by Sharif Hussein, against the Ottoman Empire. And Palestinians at that time were considered to be part of the Ottoman Empire. And if we want to go to trace back the Ottoman Empire, I think they came to rule in that part of the world referred to as Western Asia since 1516. And from the 7th century onwards to the mid-20th century, Palestine was considered to be predominantly a Muslim area, although Christians and Jews, our Jewish communities, also shared this small region at that time. If you look at the breakup of the Ottoman Empire and the division of the Levant, we have seen the French and the British became the mandatory powers and controlled basically that greater Syria, where Arab hopes was quashed for independence after the crumbling of the Ottoman Empire. And of course, as a result of the 1916 Sykes-Picot Agreement with the 1917 Balfour Declaration, the Arabs totally were desperate in not seeing an independent Arab entity in that part of the world. And that's why we started witnessing, a separate nationalism, a separate national identity by the Palestinians that began to flourish. First,